what are going to impact how you grow the crop are things like leaf spot resistance, stem canker resistance, turnip mosaic virus resistance. They can rob yield very, very quickly if they're left uncontrolled. So that 102 or 103 that you get from your yield can disappear very, very quickly if you have poor disease control, and it will cost you more to grow that crop, because certainly the earlier you go in, the more likely you are going to have earlier disease infection. So you might have to go in with one or two maybe fungicides before Christmas, and then another one after Christmas. So that all adds to cost.
The harvest progress during the week was dictated mostly by location in the country and whether you escape rain or not. The harvest in the southeast is progressing well, with some farmers waiting for crops to ripen. However, further north, progress has been slower. With the harvest only about a third complete, it's time to think about planting oilseed rape for harvest 2025. You are listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow, and give us a review on Apple or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Achieving a good establishment of oilseed rape is critical to set up lower costs and higher yields. To discuss the best ways of achieving this, I'm delighted to be joined by Ciaran Collins and Shay Phelan, Tillage Specialists in Teagasc, to discuss oilseed rape for harvest 2025. Shay, many people might be thinking about oilseed rape, but the crop for 2024 is only just being harvested. How did that crop perform this year?
Yeah, I think, Michael, compared to some of the performances of other crops around the country, it does seem to be holding its own. Now, that said, I think it depends entirely on where in the country you were and also how they came through the winter. But for the most part, certainly up the Midlands, Northeast direction, guys seem to be reasonably happy. I won't say they're altogether happy. Like, yields are probably somewhere between 1.4 to 1.8, probably for most people. There's the odd guy or odd farm getting somewhere around 2 tons an acre of oilseed rape. But I suppose, given what they're comparing oilseed rape to in terms of other crops, be it winter barley, winter oats, and winter wheat, I think, given the price of it, people are relatively happy with it. And I'd say, given what price it is there at the moment, I'd say people are happy enough to go again for next year. So I'd say while they're not delighted with it, it's probably performing better than some of the alternatives, really.
It still might be a star crop before the end of the year.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be.
Okay. And Shay, just in terms of timeliness, I suppose, in terms of planting oilseed rape is probably foremost in many people's minds. From your perspective, from I suppose maybe the southeast or maybe even the northeast point of view, or is there a difference in terms of the ideal planting date in there?
Yeah, I suppose there is slightly, Michael. Really, the further up the north, up the country you go, that date kind of comes back a bit. I mean, down south you'd probably have no real problem planting into September, certainly into the first 10 days of September. But I think once you go further north, up to the northeast and even up into the northwest, you really need to be getting it in August to give it the best chance, really. So I suppose really from next week on, I suppose from about the 20th of August on until probably the 7th or 10th of September is probably the main planting period that I would encourage fellas to look at. Now, I know some people have sown a bit later than that last year, and by all accounts they got away with it, but it's not a practice I'd be keen to put a lot of oilseed rape into mid or late September. Certainly would have done it a couple of years ago, and bird damage can be significant the later you go, particularly pigeons. I've seen a couple of fields where they've gone in on crops that are planted in 15th to 20th of September, and they've just pulled them out of the ground. So that's kind of you don't want to be in that scenario. So the earlier you can get back into September or certainly late August will be my ideal planting date anyway.
Okay, so Ciaran, Shay mentioned maybe further south, maybe down towards your part of the world, you can go a little bit later. But I suppose, kind of thinking in that, the earlier you get it in, you get a bigger canopy, and is there a chance of saving yourself a bit of money later on if it's not grazed with the pigeons?
Yeah, there is. I think there's two ends to the planting this year, really, Michael. As Shay said, like I kind of, agree with Shay in terms of the sowing dates, in terms of the ideal dates. But like we have to look at winter barley being the entry crop for oilseed rape. That's obviously out, and straw disappeared quickly enough this year. But the area of winter barley is down. So I'm sure there are some growers that would have intended sowing maybe oilseed rape but have spring barley in that ground. So I suppose the two ends to it, one is where the winter barley is out, how soon can I go? And where I've spring barley and I intend to put in rape, how late can I go? So, like, I mean, in terms of planting, certainly the earlier sown will build a bigger canopy, bigger green area index in general. It's easier to keep pigeons off it and all that, and you have the nitrogen savings. I suppose really, certainly in my part of the world, I suppose you really wouldn't be looking at getting in there before the 20th of August, I suppose, really. Now, again, variety choice would be important, like turnip, yellow virus, resistance is there in some of the varieties now, and that's a help if you are going maybe that little bit earlier. And I think there will be that little slot from before the bulk of the spring barley is ready. So it might push people in maybe a little bit earlier. In terms of the other end of the scale, I'd agree with Shay. Look, once you start getting past the 10th of September, your risk increases. So you're really looking at a variety, from that window, if you are to the 10th, maybe up to really pushing it to the maybe 18th, 20th of September, you are pushing it at that stage. You want a variety with really good vigor.
But I suppose even with that, Ciaran, it's probably not even just a variety. You probably need everything to be perfect. You need the perfect seed beds. What else needs to be right for that to make sure, if you are going that very, very late timing.
Yeah, as I was going to say there, like, I mean, the variety with good vigor, good seed bed. So again, conditions need to be right, and I think that will be an important consideration for people looking at sowing rape, that the conditions are right. You're not going to muck in rape, or if conditions are bad at that stage, then you have to leave it off. If you can get organic manures in, I think that would also be ideal for those crops, just to help them to establish quicker. Really, I think they're the key considerations if you're going late anyway.
Okay. Shay, there's a lot of varieties out there from I suppose the big seed houses out there, and there's a lot of technical aspects to each of the varieties. There's loads of different, and Ciaran mentioned earlier, yellow turnip virus, and there's various different genetics being bred into them. What really should a farmer? What's the key kind of elements of it that a farmer should be looking at when choosing a variety?
Yeah, it's a good question, Michael, because I suppose traditionally, be it oilseeds or be it cereals, generally what farmers and agronomists tend to do is look at the highest yielding variety that's out there and hope that you get that extra yield bonus from those varieties. But there's a lot more going on in terms of breeding and breeding for traits, I suppose, in oilseed rape that people really need to have a look at. So obviously you're going to have to look from the point of view of yield. You're obviously going to look for a variety that has good yield potential. So the likes of Aurelia and that Aviron, all those type of varieties, they're all over 100 in terms of yield. So that's a starting point, but it's not the finishing point. The other things that you need to look at really in terms of what are going to impact how you grow the crop are things like leaf spot resistance, stem canker resistance, as yourself and Ciaran have already mentioned, Michael, turnip mosaic virus resistance. They can rob yield very, very quickly if they're left uncontrolled. So that 102 or 103 that you get from your yield can disappear very, very quickly if you have poor disease control, and it will cost you more to grow that crop, because certainly the earlier you go in, the more likely you are going to have earlier disease infection. So you might have to go in with one or two maybe fungicides before Christmas, and then another one after Christmas. So that all adds to cost. The other ones then, I suppose, that people should be looking at as well in terms of physical characteristics of oilseed rape varieties are stem stiffness and stem height. So if you have a very tall variety, you have to think about how that variety reacts when it comes close to harvest. If you have windy weather, you can get a lot of trashing of those varieties and very tall varieties. So short varieties tend to be more popular now from that point of view. And in the last couple of years, I suppose people have moved over to using growth regulators like Carix on oilseed rape to try and shorten those crops. So if you can actually grow a crop that doesn't grow as tall, you can actually reduce your cost there and potentially reduce down the loss risks coming close to harvest. And I suppose the final one then that I think is something that's well worth looking at the moment is pod shatter resistance. A lot of the new varieties have that pod shatter resistance gene in them. Not all of them, but I think it's certainly something that needs to be looked at when you're choosing a variety, because again, it's really disheartening to grow a crop of oilseed rape and get to just about a week before harvest, and you see all these pods that begin to shatter and losing seeds on the ground. So that's something I think that's becoming more and more important for people, especially now given the rules around desiccation coming close to harvest. So I think that's something that I would pay particular attention to when I'm choosing a variety.
But Shay, I would would it be reasonable to say that you can get nearly all of those positive traits in the one variety?
You can, Michael. Yes, you can, and I suppose that's the thing you do. But again, you need to make sure some do and some don't. But a lot of them are coming with all those traits in them. Now, some will be higher than others. So some will be, say, for like leaf spot control, some of them will be 6s, some of them will be 7s. So I'd always go for the higher ones. And likewise with foam or stem canker, some are 5s, some are 6s, some are 7s, and even up as far as 9s. So I would be looking at something that has better stem canker resistance than the lower scores. So kind of like any varieties, they all have their strengths and weaknesses. So I'd be looking for ones with the most or the better scores if possible at all.
And Ciaran, there's a distinct suite of varieties, the Clearfield varieties. What are they likely to bring, or why should a farmer choose a Clearfield variety over all of the really good attributes that Shay was talking about a second ago?
Yeah, well, I suppose firstly, if I was choosing a variety, I'd look at the recommended list. That's the first point. You asked about Clearfield. Obviously, it does bring, it opens up some land to oilseed rape where there are brassica issues. In Clearfield varieties where you have they're bred to, and there's a specific herbicide that you can use that will control brassicas within those. Now, there aren't any of them on the recommended list, so there is certainly a yield lag. Now, some of them do, in fairness, possess those traits that Shay was talking about in terms of pot shatter resistance and the foam and those. So that's a positive, but certainly there is a yield lag in those scenarios. So I think, if I'm looking to maximize my profit from oilseed rape, I would be inclined to, use ground, where I don't have to go for a Clearfield variety. But however, having said that, it is a good option for somebody who doesn't have ground that's suitable, where they have a brassica issue, I suppose.
Okay. And you mentioned weed control. So the main positive for the Clearfield is that it has a very specific herbicide that you use on that. Is that a herbicide just taking out the brassicas, or is it take out all of the other broadleaf weeds?
Yeah, no, Clearanda, in fairness, is very broad spectrum. It's obviously good on charlock and the other brassica weeds, good on the likes of chickweed and poppy and those as well, speedwell. So, no, wouldn't have any great issue there. It certainly would need a graminicide to control volunteers. But no, certainly no issue there. Very good weed control. It's just, I suppose, there is that yield lag associated with those varieties.
Okay. In terms of that weed control, the Clearanda, is that pre or post emerge, Ciaran?
Post.
Post emerge, okay. And thinking about all of the other varieties, all the I suppose maybe the more standard oilseed rape varieties out there, what's the best option in terms of weed control for them? Is it a pre-emerge, or are people happy enough to go with a post-emerge if that option is available?
I suppose if we were having this conversation a few years ago, it was all about pre-em because we had very few post-em options, I still think that the pre-em option does give you the best broadleaf weed control, in terms of those metazoclor-based products, so catamaran, turbo, butazone, those type products. It certainly gives you that good base, in terms of broadleaf weed control. It does give you that flexibility thereafter as well, in terms of, it can be difficult to get in the autumn and that. So I think, pre-em, certainly from a broadweed perspective. But as I said, there are options like Belcar and, Astrocarb, which can be used later in the season as well. If you don't get in pre-em, I suppose the other one on weed control just to watch is the competition from volunteers, especially if you're using, say, min-till system, where you've shallow cultivation and you can get a lot of volunteers. It is important to use a graminicide there early in the time just to get those volunteers out, because that competition from volunteers certainly can reduce establishment in rape.
And just thinking about establishment, Shay, what is the target population of plants that farmers should be aiming at? And in order to achieve that, what's essentially the corresponding seeds per meter squared that's needed?
Yeah, so we would have done trials here, Michael, over a long number of years in Oak Park, looking at what are the optimum, I should say, optimum seed rates, plant stands, so on and so forth. So work that Dermot Forrestal would have done here would show that about 30 to 40 plants per square meter spread evenly across the field is the ideal plant stand. And to achieve that, you probably need to sow somewhere in the region of between 60 and 80 plants per square or seeds per square meter. So there's quite a bit of variation within that. But I suppose the one thing, and again, we would have seen quite a bit of it this year, is that where seed rates are a little bit lower than that, the plant does have a good capacity where, and if everything else is going right and they're spread evenly across the field, to compensate a little bit. So while 30 to 40 plants per square meter is the target, it does counteract for slightly lower seed rates than that. It does even up a little bit and branch out and fill those gaps a bit better than alternative crops, you know.
But the key is to make sure that, I suppose, they're evenly spaced across the field.
Yeah, and you
Is the
mentioned
big one.
earlier on, Michael, and Ciaran mentioned it as well, and I think it's something that we kind of have to be very, very conscious of this year is the ground conditions. We're after coming through a very, very tough autumn and spring, especially on winter barley and winter wheat, some of those autumn drill crops. The compaction certainly could be an issue in a lot of these crops, and some of these seed beds could be cloddy. So just have a good firm seed bed and get it rolled and everything like that. So, and that will help your establishment rate as well. So just, ground conditions are as important probably as seed rate and our timing of the drilling.
Okay. And when a farmer is going out to buy a seed, how do they come? Is it are they pre-packed, Shay, or what way are they done?
They come in pre-packed, generally 5 hectare packs, and there's so many seeds per hectare in those packs. So there's generally 5 hectare packs, and that's I mean, you just kind of set them up as that way, and you calibrate your drill to drill accordingly. So they're quite convenient from that point of view. So it's yeah, they're very convenient for farmers in that way.
Okay. And Jay, the other one that can be a major problem, I suppose, at establishment is slugs.
Yeah, yeah.
Given and you mentioned soils are compact and come out from a difficult year, there's huge evidence of slugs in pretty much in a huge amount of fields out there. What's the best advice around slugs in terms of establishing oilseed rape?
Yeah, you're right, Michael. Slugs are a big problem, or have been a big problem potential last year and other years as well. So, again, when you're drilling your crop, you try and get as firm a seed bed as you possibly can. So that will slow down slug movement. If you're drilling this time of year, ground tends to be that little bit drier in August than it does in September. So if you can get them in and get them growing quicker and earlier, a week's growth in August is worth nearly a month's growth in September. So if you can get them up and get them growing quickly, they'll quickly move away from the slugs. But I suppose as soon as you get them drilled in, you need to be monitoring the crop for slug damage. So you get out your slates and you put them out in the crop, put down your layers pellets or whatever you're underneath those slates, and do slug counts every couple of days to see what's the pressure like out there. And if you start to see slugs there at all, I would be inclined to put on a slug pellet, an application of slug pellets, because they can wipe out crops very, very quickly. So I wouldn't be hanging around if I see a couple of slugs under a slate at all. I would be applying a slug pellet application.
Any advantage, Shay, in going in the stubble before you go out and prepare the seed bed?
I'm not a big fan of prophylactically applying anything really, Michael. So all right, if there's been a big slug problem in a previous field of winter barley or winter wheat, yes, by all means. But other than that, I would be inclined just to grow the crop, see what's there, and treat the problem as it comes at me.
Ciaran, final question to you. Shay, as we kind of gone through everything kind of to date, we've the crop coming through the ground, slugs are kind of dealt with. Is there any other establishment concerns that we need to be worried about until the crop gets up and gets going and can look after itself?
Yeah, I suppose at that stage, really, from Cotyledon maybe to the 6 leaf stage, I suppose cabbage stem flea beetle would be your other main pest or of concern. Obviously in the UK, they have big issues with cabbage stem flea beetle. In Ireland, not so much, thankfully, in recent years anyway. And I suppose the important one, if you're monitoring your crop, is just to differentiate between the damage from cabbage stem flea beetle and slugs. So slugs will generally take a bite out of the leaf. You'll see that quite easily. People be familiar. Whereas the cabbage stem flea beetle is more this shot holing that you see in the leaves. So again, look, it's kind of monitoring the crucial period from that from cotyledon maybe to 4-6 leaf stage really, and when you're seeing a significant amount of damage, or you can see the cabbage stem flea beetle in the crop, you could apply a pyrethroid at that stage if necessary. But in recent years, thankfully now we haven't had any great issues, but it is important to monitor at the same time.
And is there a threshold for that, Ciaran?
There's a number of thresholds depending on the size of the plant. I think if you're talking about somewhere in excess of 25% of leaf area up to the 2-leaf stage, and about 50% of the leaf area up to the 4-leaf stage. So where you'd be looking at treatment with a pyrethroid then, so like your Carate-Zeon or Decis, those type products.
Ciaran, as always, thanks very much, and Shay as well. Thank you very much. As always, a mind of information, and hopefully that'll give people some bit of an indication of where to go in Oilseed Drive. Thanks very much, guys.
All right, thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
So that's it for this week, and my thanks to Ciaran and Shay for joining me on the show. So if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague, and as always, rate, review, and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.